This is slide 7. Now that the war is over in Europe, let's talk about the fighting in the Pacific. Japan's only hope to win the war in the Pacific was to win quickly. So Japanese expansion happens very quickly. And if you look at the map here in the top right-hand corner, sorry, went blank there, the line, the black line, okay, is the total of Japanese expansion by 1942. So kind of out here, right? Japan controlled everything inside that line by 1942. That was the height of their expansion, by mid-1942, July. Okay? That's a lot of territory for a small island nation to conquer. Okay? But that's as far as they're going to get. The U.S. military will kick in, fight back from Pearl Harbor, and eventually reconquer everything here. Let's talk about how they do that, all right? And we will start with the Philippines. Now, the Philippines, just for your mapping purposes, okay, is this little island group right here, okay? And the Philippines is controlled by the United States, and specifically by General Douglas MacArthur. Let me spell it for you. General Douglas MacArthur, M-A-C-A-R-T-H-U-R, MacArthur. MacArthur is the Pacific version of Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the commander of all Allied forces in Europe. MacArthur will be the commander of all Allied forces in the Pacific. And his base is in the Philippines. The Philippines are very near and dear to MacArthur's heart. Japan, which owns this little bitty part of China here, okay, has moved down into the Philippines. Now, MacArthur wants to fight it out in the Philippines, but he is ordered to withdraw. Okay? So he will leave the Philippines, goes to Australia to organize a whole new, a whole resistance that the Americans are going to fight back from Australia. When he leaves, he goes to Australia and he makes this very famous quote. I may have been driven out of the Philippines, but I shall return, he says. And he does. Eventually he will fulfill that promise. But he said, I shall return. Very famous MacArthur quote there. When he leaves behind a group of soldiers to sort of cover his retreat. He doesn't want to, but he's ordered to. Those U.S. soldiers and Filipinos are captured by the Japanese and are then forced to march 85 miles through dense tropical jungle mountains, are forced to march 85 miles to prison camps. This comes to be known as the Bataan Death March. Okay? These are American and Filipino soldiers who are forced to march 85 miles to prison camps. 75,000 were captured by the Japanese. 75,000 captured in the Philippines. Of those that are marched, of those 75,000, 16,000 die on the march. It's a 9-day forced march through the heat and humidity of tropical jungles. They're not given water to drink. They're not given food to drink. A 9-day march, 85 miles, 75,000 captured, 16,000 of those died, known as the Bataan Death March. Worst days of MacArthur's life when he was forced to leave his soldiers in the Philippines. Now eventually the tide will turn against the Japanese. Okay? Two specific battles I want you to know of. The first one is called the Battle of Coral Sea. The Battle of the Coral Sea. And if you look over here on the map, there is Coral Sea right there, just off the coast of Australia. Now, the Battle of Coral Sea is significant for one main reason. It was a draw, first of all. Neither side can claim a victory. They both lost about the same amount of ships. But this would be the first time in U.S. history where neither fleet saw or fired a shot directly at the other one. It was entirely fought with carrier-based aircraft. Aircraft took off from carriers, went, found the enemy, bombed them, and then flew back to their own carriers. And both sides did this. Neither side's ships ever saw each other. First time in history that had happened. Second battle that I want to make you aware of is not really on the map here, but here you see, let me just kind of show you. If you look at the map, here is Pearl Harbor, right there, Hawaii. Okay, right about there. See the little dots right there. Right about there is an island called Midway Island, because it's about midway between Hawaii and Japan. Right? Midway Island. And the Battle of Midway would be the turning point battle in the Pacific. Up until that point, Japan had always been on the offensive, attacking, and expanding. But the U.S. managed to break the Japanese code. So we discovered that they were going to attack at Midway, because if they have Midway, from there they can reach Hawaii and Pearl Harbor to bomb it. And if they can take Pearl Harbor, they can reach the west coast of the United States, California, and bomb it. So Midway is sort of the next stepping stone across the Pacific. We find out they're going to attack Midway, so we set a trap for them. We lure them in, we let them launch their planes to go attack Midway, and then we launch our carrier planes to go attack their carriers. But because the Japanese planes are off attacking Midway, they have none protecting their carriers. At the Battle of Midway, the Japanese lose 4 aircraft carriers. They only have 6 total in the Pacific. They lose 4 of them at Midway. We lose 1. We'll take a 4-to-1 trade any day. Battle of Midway is the turning point battle in the Pacific. From that point on, Japan is fighting a defensive war. Okay? Now, once we go on the offensive, we use a strategy here, a battle tactic called island hopping. Let's say Japan controls 6 islands in a row. Okay? We're not going to attack and try to recapture all 6 islands. Let's say we attack the first one, and then we hop over the second one and we attack the third one. And we hop over the fourth one and we attack the 5th one. Okay? The idea being that you leave the most heavily fortified, heavily defended islands alone. You attack the weaker ones, and then you cut off supplies to the other ones that are left. You're going to starve them out. Okay? So you hop over the worst islands, the most heavily defended ones, and you surround them, cutting off all supplies. It's called island hopping, and it's a very effective way of retaking islands. Island fighting in the Pacific is the deadliest fighting in the war, much worse than anything we see in Europe. The Japanese dig into the mountains on the islands. They hide in caves in the mountains. They have underground cave systems, tunnels connecting caves within the mountains, almost so much that bombing does absolutely no good because they get far enough underground. So we have to land on the islands and root them out in hand-to-hand combat. Island fighting is the deadliest fighting in the war. Okay. Now, let's talk about a couple of specific battles here, a couple more. First of all, the Battle of Guam. Now, Guam is important, if you look back at the map here. Guam is one of the little islands in this group right here. Okay? Right there. Guam is in there. Now, Guam is important because from Guam, our long-range bombers can make it all the way to Japan and back. So we can have continuous 24-hour-a-day bombing runs on the home islands of Japan. So that's why Guam is important. Deadly fighting, but it's necessary. Now, eventually, once we can start bombing Japan, we close in on them. Okay? And 4 little battles here I want to talk about specifically. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. You see it on your screen there, Leyte, Leyte Gulf. It is the largest naval battle in history. It takes place as Macarthur is trying to retake the Philippines. Okay? Leyte Gulf is in the Philippines, largest naval battle in history. More surface ships blasting away at each other than ever before, and ever since. We'll never see a larger naval battle. That's just not how battle is fought anymore. Battle is fought with smart bombs, long-range missiles, and all that. Okay? Now, say the Battle of the Philippines, Macarthur does retake the Philippines. He fulfills his promise, I shall return, and he does. It is a very deadly return. Okay? Macarthur will retake the Philippines, but it is very costly. Okay? Over 60,000 Americans die recapturing the Philippines. But Macarthur fulfills his promise and frees the people of the Philippines. Now, as we make our way further north toward Japan, we see the Battle of Iwo Jima. Okay? Battle of Iwo Jima is where we get this famous image there at the bottom of your screen of the flag being raised atop Mount Suribachi on the island of Iwo Jima. It is very important here that we take Iwo Jima because planes that are damaged on bombing runs from Guam to Japan and back can't make it all the way back to Guam. Iwo Jima gives those planes a chance to land before they have to crash in the ocean. So it allows damaged planes to get back safely, which is why we need Iwo Jima. And finally, our last battle here, Okinawa is sort of the last island, which is right here. If you look at the screen, I just circled it. There's Okinawa right there. Okinawa is sort of that last step before we get ready to invade Japan. Okay? So all necessary battles, but all very deadly battles as well. Now, when it begins to look hopeless for Japan, they start to practice something called kamikaze bombing. Kamikaze is suicide bombers. Okay? Japanese pilots would load their planes full of bombs and gasoline, as much as it could carry, and take off from their carriers with the sole purpose of never returning. Their job was to fly their plane into the side of a U.S. ship and wreak as much havoc and do as much damage as they possibly can. Kamikaze pilots knew they weren't going back. In fact, they had a funeral, for lack of a better term, a ceremony to honor them, to celebrate them before they even took off. Now, kamikaze pilots are hard for us to understand because we have a totally different mentality in Western fighting, in the U.S. and Western part of the world here. Our mentality is, if things are that bad, retreat, regroup, and live to fight another day. You're more important, what you can contribute. The idea of suicide missions make no sense to us. You regroup and live to fight another day. Japanese has something called the Bushido Code. You don't have to know the name. But basically it's the code they live by. And in the Bushido Code, they have no concept of surrender. There is no greater shame you can bring upon your family name than to surrender in fighting. You fight to the death. If there is one of you and 5,000 of the enemy and you're out of bullets, you charge at the enemy with your gun and try to beat as many of them to death as you can, even though you know you can't. So we don't understand that sort of mentality, but that's how Japanese live. And that's part of the reason that we knew invading the Japanese home islands was going to be so deadly, was because every Japanese citizen would have been armed. Man, woman, children, elderly, you named it. Every one of the Japanese citizens would have fought to the death to protect the emperor. We were going to have to kill every one of them when we invaded Japan. And the kamikaze pilots were just the tip of the iceberg.